My name is Kimberly Berry. I am a 40-year-old woman from Tallahassee, Florida. I currently work in state government. I am married, and I have two children, a daughter who is 18 and a son, Caleb, who is 11 years old. So when Caleb was about 4 months old, I noticed that he didn't do some typical things. I have a background in early childhood education, so when there were milestones, I was pretty keen on what was supposed to be happening at certain steps. And so even though typical diagnosis for autism isn't until much later, I noticed certain things. I noticed that he would not look at me and reciprocate. So if I would smile at him, you would expect the child starting around 3 or 4 months to smile back at you. And he wasn't really doing that. And so I said to myself, give him some time, because every child doesn't develop at the same rate. But I remember distinctly, because he was a very cute baby. He was the cutest baby ever. And people used to dote on him. His babysitter used to dote on him, people at church. And I remember there was one point where I was at church and I was holding him, and someone was doting on him, how he's such a beautiful, precious baby. And I remember thinking in my mind, he is a beautiful, precious baby, but something's wrong. And I didn't want to say that because I felt like I was confessing that, but I knew that something wasn't all the way right. So moving forward, I stayed trying to get him help here and there. When he was about 10 months, I put him in physical therapy because he wasn't standing, and he wasn't trying to walk. He was kind of like a bump on a log. And people told me he's just a fat, lazy baby. But he wasn't quite developing normally. But it wasn't until he was about 2 years old, and I had a friend of the family come over, and she was a speech language pathologist and professor at Florida State University at the time. And she was a friend, she was a sister Greek of ours. And I said, can you just come and take a look at him to see what you might think? And so she came over to the house, and she sat down and played with him for about a minute. And she looked at me while she was playing with him, and they had some toys on the floor. And she looked at me and she said, "Nobody's told you this baby has autism yet?" And that's when I first had the inclination. She looked at him, and he would play with her, and he rocked while he played. And so now I know that was pretty classic. But up until then, I had all these doctor's appointments and had spoken to a couple of different therapists, because he was by that time in OT, speech, and PT, and no one had said autism until she did. So when she said that to me, it was relieving. I had a sense of relief. And it's not that I was celebrating that, but it was, now I have something to go with. It's like someone misdiagnosing you. If you're sick and you say that your back hurts, and someone gives you, say, some Tylenol because your back hurts, but that's not the issue, then you're giving someone treatment for a diagnosis that doesn't exist. And so in that respect, now that I had a diagnosis, I was able to do something about it. And so in my Kim nerdy self, what I did is I just started researching. I went on Amazon and bought all these books. And I was in graduate school at the time myself, and it was funny because I was taking statistics, and I don't think I learned a bit of statistics that semester because I would be in the computer lab, and while the teacher was teaching, I would be combing the research literature because I had access to it at school, looking for treatment and promising practices and all those kind of things for autism. I ended up also quitting my job because I was working full time and I was going to school full time. And I said, okay, well, he needs a good chance at being successful. So I went home, and job was stressing me out anyway. But I went home and I told my husband that I really needed to focus on school and I just could not work anymore. So I quit, and my life became taking him to PTOT speech and being a part of Card Center studies for the next 3 years. So that's how I reacted. So some of the growth that I have seen is that, so when I went and got that intensive 3 years of therapy for him, I also was able to enroll him in school because children with disabilities are able to enroll in school, in preschool, at ages 2.5. And it was pretty cool because it was the first year that the local elementary school that we were assigned to had a pre-K program. So at 2.5, he was able to go into that program and get intensive day-long intervention for 3 years before he went into kindergarten. And so by the time he got to kindergarten, the first week, they were talking about mainstreaming him. And so he went from the ESE class to the typical class in about a week. And so that was really good. And we've seen growth over time. And he has been able to develop and maintain friendships. He might have one or two typical friends at the time. One of the challenges that I think that we're currently going through right now is just the onset of puberty and getting older and finding out about your diagnosis. I think around 4th or 5th grade, he figured out that he was different from the other children in a way that was not typical. And so the explanation of why am I interested in these things and other kids aren't, or I see their world and I see my world and something isn't clicking, that has been trying, and I'm not necessarily sure how we're going to get out of that, but we'll be successful. It's just the not knowing and how you can read a lot of books and you try to read and glean experiences from other people, but the unknown as he gets older is an obstacle, especially as an African American boy. That there are specific special challenges that we have that are different than others. So. So I think there are a few challenges that come with having a child of color, and especially a boy on the spectrum. And even the challenges with him is because he has been mainstreamed and he does have friends, and not that, people will say things like, he doesn't look autistic, or he looks fine to me. Um, and, and it's hard because you don't want him to look different, but as his mother, that there are things that are different. And so, uh, a, like a challenge for us academically is comprehension and inference. However, people will see him and see him read and read out loud and say, well, he doesn't have any problems reading. He's reading to me right now. He's so smart. And yes, he is smart. However, in 2019 education system, reading the words isn't enough. And you have to understand what you read, and you have to be in the mind of the person writing or in the mind of the characters in the book. And that's hard for him. And so people will say, oh, he's smart, he has it together. But I know that he's failing reading. And so it's hard for me to kind of navigate that world of what other people think he's doing and what I know actually is the case. And then there's that piece of whether or not I'm using strategies that I know are proven or best practices, and that challenge between that and what I was having a conversation yesterday about Black Mama Kim, like how much of his impairments need to be addressed by clinical strategies, and how much of it is me saying, okay, you need to sit down and focus and do what you need to do. And that to me is kind of like a lifelong struggle, because I may say, for example, if I'll take it when he was younger, and he might fall out in a store. I remember those days that he used to scream at the top of his lungs in the grocery store, and scream over and over and over again. And some people will look at you like he need a whipping. But what I understand is that it was too much for him. That the fluorescent lights, he could see how they click. It's too much stimulation. The grocery store scanners, the beeping, beep, beep, beep. He could hear all of that in real time. The conversations he could hear, and it just became overwhelming and too much. And we were okay when we were at the back of the store, but once he came to the front, we started going to the checkout, he would have a full out meltdown. And then going out the doors, he would have a meltdown too. And it was funny because I was watching Temple Grandin one time, and she was saying that she thought of those doors like a guillotine. And she thought that if she walked through them, they were going to chop her. And that fear and that anxiety is so very real for many kids. But to the outside world, he just needs a spanking, or even family members who say, you're babying him too much. But what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to be a good mother and accountable to him and his needs. And so there's this constant song and dance between, am I doing the right thing, or are they right, and do I just need to toughen up a bit? And it's a constant guessing of yourself and your abilities, but at the same time, that you are the closest person to this child, and you are this child's only advocate. So it's really hard. And as he gets older, you wonder, how is this going to play out? We went to SeaWorld a couple of days ago, and he was with his friends, and his two friends are white boys, and they were all running through SeaWorld, as children do. and, but you know that as an African American boy, as he gets older, if somebody sees him running, the assumption is that he's running from something and we need to catch him because he did something wrong. And so I don't know how I got all the way back around to that, but this concept of I need to prepare him for the world because he's different, and everyone is not going to be as accommodating as he gets older. I'm scared for secondary school and middle school and high school when things change and things aren't as friendly. How to prepare him for that. There are some people that are, advocating, as they should, for police to be trained in autism awareness and to know the signs and all of that. But if they see my baby running down the street because he is terrified of birds and he's running from them, are they going to think he's running from something and harm him? Because at that time, autism help and understanding and training and tactics aren't going to help in that split-second decision that someone has to make if they see him running. So it's like, do I tell him to toughen up and that the bird is not going to bother him? Or do I comfort him when I see a crow flying and I know he's definitely afraid of crows, and I comfort him and console him that it's going to be okay? It's hard. Advice for parents and families. I would say seek information. Really seek information from anyone who will help. One of the things that I've seen is that we have this kind of presupposition on how things are supposed to go. You see your little baby, you think about what you want that child to be when they grow up, and you try to scaffold them towards that. But at the same time, you kind of have to let them be individuals and let them be themselves. And one of the things that I've learned with having a child on the spectrum is that is that child, that you can't make him or her into something that they aren't. You have to celebrate who they are, and you have to work with other people to help you do that. There is sometimes this pushback, especially with families of color, and the strategies or the things that the so-called experts are trying to tell you. And sometimes it needs to be taken with a grain of salt. But sometimes people are really trying to help. And so whether that person, because when you look at autism consultants and you look at who is going into the field, it's predominantly white women. And sometimes we have to kind of work past those barriers and be honest about the racial barriers, the gender barriers, the age barriers, all of those things, and talk about them so that we can move forward to ultimately help our children. I remember the first doctor that I had when Caleb was younger was an African American woman, and she missed the diagnosis. And so I had to trust the next doctor, who was a white woman, with the diagnosis in order to move that forward. At the same time, the person who diagnosed him was an African American woman. And I feel like in some other arenas, I was dismissed for being an African American woman with concerns. And then there are other arenas that I was celebrated for that. And so it's not a one size fits all. You have to work with whomever you have. And if there's an issue that comes up, then you have to be honest and be forthright and say, I don't think this is going to work for us. And go from there. The other thing I want to say is that you are your child's advocate. And a lot of times you have to advocate with the public, but you also have to advocate with family, and you have to advocate with friends. I said before that people said to me, and even my mother-in-law said this to me a couple of months ago, does he still have autism? Are they still saying that? Because he looks fine to me. And I had to say, yes, he does. And we're working on some things, and we're getting better at it. Because people will tell you, well, he don't look like he have it to me, or they will celebrate you and say, well, because he doesn't look like it, you must be doing something really good, and you must be really working with him and doing all these things, because I know so-and-so or X, Y, and Z, and that child just be running all over the place and all of that. And we have to stick up for each other. We can't let each other be demonized because of misunderstandings from the general public and world. We have to constantly be educating others on the needs of our children and advocating for the needs of our children, and working to ensure that this is not just an accepting world, but an inclusive world. I hate the words autism acceptance, because it's kind of like, oh, this is some sad thing that happened and I just have to accept it. No. God made my baby. He made him different from the typical world, but I also believe everybody's on the spectrum a little bit. Some people tap their foot, some people full out flap, and that's okay. At the end of the day, we all need to be inclusive of each other's differences and embracing of each other, and not in this place where we're othering each other.